Hey guys, it's Kira and today I'm actually going to be doing a book tag. Now I don't do book tags very often. I think I might have only done one like once in the whole time that I've had this channel, but a brand new book tag was made very recently and I just had to do it because it was made by two people whose channels I absolutely love, and also just the content of the tag itself was incredible as well, so I just couldn't resist giving it a try. So that book tag is, as you'll obviously be able to tell from the title of this video, the Dark Academia book tag, and it was created by Emma and Carolyn, both of whom I will link down below because, as I said, their channels are incredible and I love them both ever so much. But this book tag sounded so much fun because it's obviously about dark academia and just dark books and just like culture and everything in general, and then there's also like a quick fire round which sounded really fun too. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started on the questions. So naturally, the very first question is, what are your favourite dark academia books and films? Now my favourite book was really easy for me to pick because it also just happens to be my favourite book in general, not just in terms of dark academia, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, because I just think this book is absolutely incredible. I feel like it really fits into this genre quite well because it's so dark and so atmospheric, but then you've also got this sort of theme of education right throughout in terms of following this guy, Victor Frankenstein, who decides that he wants to try and create a perfect human. And so he goes off to university and studies this subject matter for years and eventually manages to succeed in what he's trying to do, and then we kind of follow along with the consequences of that. But it kind of follows along with his education right throughout in terms of both formal education and education in life, as he has to learn to deal with the consequences of everything. We also have another character in the form of the creature that he creates and follow along with his very informal education right throughout the book as well. And I just feel like it's such a dark book. It really deals with what it is to be a human and the darkness that can reside in people and how people can struggle to face up to what they have sometimes done. I just think it's an incredible book and I absolutely love it so much. A couple of honorary mentions would have to go to The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, because this is always at the top of a lot of people's dark academia book list. It's one of the most well-known books out there, I'd say, and it's just such an incredible story. It's super dark, super creepy, and again, similarly to Frankenstein, really focuses on that sort of darkness of humanity and really delves into what it is to be people and kind of like the moral issues that can reside within a lot of people, which I think is really interesting and it's one of my favourite topics to explore in literature. But yeah, absolutely love this one and I'm definitely due a reread. The other book I'd like to mention, just for its dark atmosphere, is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, just because in terms of dark atmosphere, this book is everything. It's obviously set in the Yorkshire Moors, which is a place that I'm very familiar with, but this book just really brings it to life in such a dark way, and I just absolutely love the way that it captures the landscape of the Yorkshire Moors and sort of uses it to add to the darkness of this book and really sort of delves into that as a character in and of its own right, as well as of course all of the other dark characters that this book is made up of. So absolutely love this book, and those are some of my favourite dark academia books. Now, although I managed to pick up quite a few books that I think sort of represent my taste in terms of dark academia, when it came to trying to choose a film I really struggled, just because when it comes to books, clearly I really like the more dark and gothic style of literature. However, when it comes to films, I kind of look to them for usually a little bit more of like a light entertainment style, so I don't often seem to watch the more serious dark films, and when I do, it tends to be more like the action and fantasy style, like Star Wars, Harry Potter, or in terms of TV like Game of Thrones, whereas I don't necessarily think I watch much academic style films. So the one that I've picked out, I'm not sure that it technically constitutes a dark academia film, but I do think it's definitely a dark film and one that I absolutely love. It's one of my all-time favourite films, and it is Girl Interrupted, which is based on a memoir by Susanna Kaysen. I actually love the memoir and the film. I actually wrote my dissertation about the memoir because I just think it was such an interesting book. But in terms of the film, I think it really sort of brings up a very dark aesthetic. It's obviously following a girl called Susanna who has been taken to a psychiatric ward, and she manages to live there for a couple of years, I believe in the late 60s, and it kind of follows her as well as some of the other patients there. And the book itself really delves into the sort of experience of living on a psychiatric ward and sort of how it felt for her at that time. It's very retrospective and she's now looking at it and sort of thinking about whether or not the experience was right for her and whether she should have ended up there. But in terms of the film, which is less of a sort of retrospective memoir and more like a sort of, it feels like you're in a present day, like a current experience, definitely is very dark. I think Winona Ryder and Angelina Jolie are incredible in it, and I just think the aesthetic of it is just a really, really beautiful, poignant, and I just really enjoy how that film comes out. So yeah, that's my example. I'm not sure if it counts, but that's what I came up with. So the next question is, which poet would you like to have a drink with? Specifically, which dead poet would you want to have a drink with? Now, I've chosen Alfred Tennyson because he is a poet that I actually haven't read for quite a while. However, I remember studying his works back when I was doing my A-levels, so when I was like 16 or 17, and I found his poems really captivating because they had a sort of longer, more story-style narrative, in my opinion, which is kind of what I look for in poetry. I don't really like super snappy and short poems. I like ones that sort of go on for a little bit longer and have a bit more of a story to them. So his poems definitely ticked that box, and then they also were very intertextual, which I found really interesting. So a lot of his poems referred to other works, so a lot of them actually sort of used Shakespeare as an inspiration, but then he referred to, I think, some like Chaucer stuff as well, and I'm sure there are plenty of other examples. But I always find that intertextuality really interesting, particularly in poetry, because obviously the poet can then use another work in a different format and use that to sort of inspire the story of their poem and sort of take it in a different direction, and I just really enjoyed how he did that. So it would be really interesting to talk to him about how he found his inspiration and all of those things. So Tennyson. Now the next question is one that I struggled with a little bit because it asks for your favourite painting or sculpture. Now I have to admit, I'm not that arty of a person. Literature is kind of my favourite form of art, and I don't necessarily find myself sort of looking at paintings or sculptures very often. However, one painting that I did find kind of interesting is quite a modern one, and I don't know if you'll probably remember, but a few years ago Banksy did a painting, I think it was like a child holding a balloon, and when it went at auction for like over £1 million, I think, it then sort of self-destructed and like shredded, and I just found that to be a really captivating piece of art because he'd obviously very consciously decided that that was what was going to happen. But in my mind it was just really interesting because it was kind of, I guess, his commentary on how things have the value that we place on them, and how he kind of just like sort of turned that on its head by destroying something that had been perceived to be so valuable. And it was kind of just like how, whether or not it didn't have his name attached to it, whether the painting would have been anywhere near as valuable. And I just think it was a really interesting way to turn not only a painting but also like make a social commentary in that form of art. And I guess it's kind of not a sculpture, but it kind of turned itself into an art installation type thing by just turning itself into something even bigger and making a really interesting social commentary, which is of course what Banksy is all about. But I found that to be quite a fun way to turn art on its head a little bit and just make us think about how we perceive things, which I really liked. The next question though was one that I found really easy to answer, and that was, what is your favourite architectural marvel? Now of course there are some amazing buildings and creations out there in the world, but one of my favourites is a castle in South Germany called Neuschwanstein, which is a huge white castle in Bavaria, and it absolutely looks incredible. I believe it was actually one of the inspirations for the Disney castle that's at the start of all of the Disney films, and I just think it looks absolutely beautiful. I'll insert a picture of it somewhere on the screen just so you can get an idea for what I'm talking about. But Jay and I actually went to go and visit it a few summers ago now when we were staying in Munich. We got the train down through the Bavarian Alps and into this area where Neuschwanstein is, and it just looked amazing. It was such a beautiful day, but I just think it's the kind of place that would look incredible no matter where you were. And I also just think it's amazing that it's still in such amazing tact, because obviously in Germany there were a lot of buildings that were destroyed during the wartime, as is the case in a lot of places in Europe, but that building is somehow still intact and it looks amazing and so beautiful, and I just absolutely love it. Next up we've got, which Shakespeare play would you want to be the lead in? And for me it has to be Macbeth, because I just think Macbeth is such an interesting character. Obviously I already spoke about how I really like books and plays and just literature in general that delves into humanity and morality and what it is to be a human and what drives behaviour, and I think Macbeth is probably one of the first works that really delves into that, because it really just looks at this character Macbeth who starts out being so well revered by everyone around him, and he's a well-loved character, and he's someone that you'd probably consider to be quite moral, but then because of his desire for power and the path that he chooses to go down, he ends up sort of descending into this person where he doesn't even recognise who he is anymore. And I just think if I was an actor, which I 100% am not, Macbeth would be a really interesting character to play because of that sort of dramatic change of his character right throughout. And I also think it's a really interesting character to play because he's surrounded by other really intriguing characters who go on their own moral journeys, particularly people like Lady Macbeth, who again goes on this journey where she takes herself down a path that she can't really come back from. So yeah, really interesting character, and I love Macbeth. So the next question is, how many languages do you speak and which languages would you like to learn? So for me, I actually only speak one language, which is something that I'm super unhappy about, because I do wish that in England it was more of a priority to learn languages and that children were taught languages from a younger age, because particularly in the rest of Europe, learning languages is so important, and in most of the other countries in Europe, people speak at least 2 languages, and I just think it's kind kind of a shame that England doesn't really put that as a priority, because I think the older you get, the harder it is to learn languages. But the language that I would like to learn most, and that is at the top of my priority list, is German, just because I love the language, I love the place, and if I was to sort of move abroad, I feel like Germany would be at the top of my list, because I just think it's such a lovely place and I've enjoyed going there every time I've visited. I am actually currently in the process of learning German, but it's kind of an ongoing process and it's moved kind of up and down my priority list over the years. But I was actually putting quite a lot of effort in during my last year of university, because I was able to do some like side modules alongside my English literature degree where I was learning German, and I found that I progressed a lot more in that year because I was able to use it conversationally and sort of actually progress a lot faster than I had done when just trying to learn it on my own. But Jay and I are both trying to learn it, so I'm hoping that if we actually put a little bit more effort in, I might actually progress and sort of find myself being more fluent. But yeah, that is my top language I'd like to learn. So for the next question, I've kind of cheated because it asked for your favourite fictional quote from either poetry, prose or a play, and I've actually picked 3, all from prose, because I do find myself leaning more towards reading prose than poetry or plays, and I've picked 3 because I just couldn't decide which ones, and so I'll just tell you which quotes I've picked. So the first quote is from War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, and for that one I've picked a quote that's actually on the back of the book, and it was a quote that when I read it I didn't necessarily notice too much, and then when Jay read it he loved the quote so much and he said it so many times and it's just kind of made me reassess it. So I don't know if that counts, but I do absolutely love this quote, and the quote is, "Let the dead bury their dead, but whilst I'm alive I must live and be happy." And that's said by Prince Andre during the course of this book, and he is a character that, again, like a lot of the characters I seem to like the most, goes on a massive journey in which he kind of has to reassess his morals and the motivation behind his life, and I just think that quote is really beautiful and speaks to that sort of, I guess, a bit of self-love. This must be like what self-love was like in the 1800s, or, you know, just how people had to sort of like reassess their lives. And Prince Andre is someone who put honour at the top of everything. Honour and duty were his main motivations. And I think at this point in the book, he kind of has to reassess that and sort of figure out whether or not honour and duty are worthwhile if it sort of means sacrificing his own happiness all of the time. So I think it's a really beautiful quote, especially in the context of the book, but just in general, I feel like it's a quote that you can learn a lot from and just sort of try and apply in your own life. So I really like that one. The next quote I've picked is kind of a more comical one, and that is from a book that I only read in the last year but I absolutely loved, and that book is Watership Down by Richard Adams. Now in this book, which obviously follows a group of rabbits, they manage to meet some other characters who help them out, and the characters that they meet, which are other species of animals, have their own accents, and they all kind of sound like this one that I'm about to say kind of sounds like he has an Italian accent, or at least that's how it sounds in my mind. But they meet this little mouse who manages to help them, and his accent is just so cute. So let me just find a quote somewhere in here. So I'm not going to do the accent, but basically this little mouse says, "One time a mouse helped you want him, he come." And I just think it's just so cute. I feel like I sound ridiculous the way that I've just said that, but basically he doesn't say any of his H's and it just sounds like a really cute little mouse. But I just love it in the context of the story that they just make friends with this little mouse who's got a cute little accent, and I just thought it was a really fun quote. Then the final quote that I'm about to talk about is from a book which is a long-time favourite of mine, and that is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it's actually the final sentence of the whole book, which I feel like is super cliche, but it's just such a beautiful quote, and it is the sentence which goes, "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." And I really can't say why I love this quote so much other than that it just sounds incredible. Fitzgerald is an author, I feel, who just knows how to put words together in a way that just sounds so beautiful and just so pleasing to the ear, and that quote is one which absolutely ticks that box. I just think it sounds so beautiful, and that's why I love it. It just sounds lovely, and I think it's a beautiful way to conclude a really, really interesting story. Now, speaking of which, the next question is, if you were to die like a fictional character, which one would it be? And I have to say that Gatsby from The Great Gatsby has an incredible death, which I think really suits his character, but in terms of dying like a character, I think his is quite good because it's very poignant and sort of moving in terms of his story, but it's also very quick, and you don't, I think, have too much time to be concerned about it. It catches him by surprise, which I think if you were going to end up being, you know, murdered, that might be quite a good way to go because you don't have too much time to worry about it, and it ends quickly, so I think maybe like Gatsby. Next up we've got, if you were to go to any university or college throughout the world, which one would it be? And kind of like Carolyn, I'm going to have to say Yale, because I absolutely love the aesthetic of Yale that's portrayed on Gilmore Girls. I'm a huge Gilmore Girls fan and I absolutely love Rory Gilmore so much. I think she's an incredible character and I just think it would be so amazing to have that experience of going to Yale and particularly studying English literature there. I just think it would be so much fun, and if I had the choice I'd definitely go there. And the next question is, if you were to do a PhD, what would the topic of it be? And for me, it would have to be Gothic literature. As I said at the beginning of the video, Frankenstein is my favourite book of all time. And I actually studied that book for the very first time when I was doing my A-levels, and the sort of topic that we were looking at it within the context of was Gothic literature. And I honestly loved studying it in that context so much that once I went to university and started studying my English literature degree, I took every single possible module that either let me focus on Frankenstein or Gothic literature, because I just found it so interesting. And ever since then, I've just always loved reading dark classics, and particularly ones that are usually from the Victorian era. But in general, I just think it would be really interesting to delve more into the Gothic genre and potentially look more at like the origins of the genre, and then also look sort of forward into the modern day era and look at how the Gothic genre as it was originally created has then influenced Gothic and horror in modern pop culture and literature, because I always think it's really interesting to look at how genres and styles of literature and art have progressed throughout the ages. So in terms of the Gothic, I think it'd be so interesting to look at the origins of the Gothic genre, then look at sort of what was created in its sort of original era, and then kind of look forward into the modern day and think about how it has influenced pop culture and other things since then, because I have a feeling that obviously the Gothic has definitely influenced sort of modern horror and other things that would kind of like modern day fit into that Gothic genre. And I just think it'd be really interesting to look at the progression of the genre throughout, and I think that doing a PhD on it would definitely allow you to do that. So yeah, it would have to be on something to do with the Gothic. So the next question is there a fictional character that you would die for? And I have to say that my one would be the creature from Frankenstein, because right from the start I really loved his character and I just felt so empathetic towards him, because I feel like he was definitely the victim of the story. And I know that's maybe a controversial topic because he does do some terrible things throughout the story, but I just found his character was so sad to me because of the way that he was treated right from the moment of his kind of birth, if you will, because he definitely wasn't birthed like a normal human. But I just feel like Victor Frankenstein created this creature and then completely avoided all responsibility following that and treated this creature as though he was an inherently evil being, when actually, as the creature managed to show us right throughout the book, he has the capacity for some great love and kindness, but he's just not given the opportunity to develop those parts of his character because of the way that he's treated by other people around him. And I just think that I felt really empathetic towards him, and I feel like he deserves someone to champion him, because there is no one else in the story who really stands up for him or his rights. So yeah, definitely the creature from Frankenstein. Onto the quickfire round. First up is cloth bound or leather bound, and I'd say probably leather bound if it was vegan leather, because obviously I wouldn't want to buy real leather pages, but I do think leather bound feels nicer than cloth bound. Sculpture or paintings, definitely would have to be sculpture, because I'm just always so in awe of the fact that people can actually create sculptures out of like stone that manage to look so realistic and have done so for many thousands of years. I'm just absolutely in awe of that art form. It just seems so incredible, and I don't think I could ever master that skill, but it is amazing for anyone that can. Piano or violin, definitely piano. I love piano music so much. Films or theatre would have to be films, because I just love watching a film, and I feel like, you know, I'm the kind of person that likes being at home, and so obviously you can watch a film at home easily just by sitting on your sofa, putting something on TV, getting cozy in your pyjamas, whereas to the theatre you have to get all fancy, and that's just not really me. Poetry or prose would definitely have to be prose. I love books so much that I haven't ever really read poetry of my own volition. It's usually just been to study when I've been doing it in modules at university or at school. And while I do think it can be really interesting to study, it's not something that I typically read for my own personal enjoyment. Although I'm sure there are some amazing poems out there, it's just not something I typically find myself reaching for, whereas books, I'm always reading. Museums or bookshop, easily as bookshops, because who doesn't want to spend all of their time in bookshops and all of their money, to be honest, because literally that is all I do with my money. The smell of books or the smell of coffee and tea would have to be the smell of coffee and tea, particularly the smell of coffee, even though I'm actually much more of a tea drinker. I just think the smell of coffee is so lovely, and I feel like the smell of coffee paired with a good book is just next level. Fountain pen or typewriter? Definitely a typewriter, because is there anything more satisfying than the like clicking sound of a typewriter? I really don't think so. And then finally, new or used books. Now this really depends, and I'm really sort of struggling to decide between this one. I'd typically say new, because I do like having books that I own myself, that you find them and they're so beautiful and you can keep them in the condition that you'd like them to. But in some cases, I do think there's something lovely about having a vintage old book. So normally new, but sometimes used. So those are my answers to all of the questions from the Dark Academia book tag. This has been so much fun because I just love talking about these kinds of dark books and everything else that surrounds them. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing all of my thoughts. If you end up doing this book tag as well, let me know, because I do think it's always so interesting to see how other people answer the questions and whether we've got any similarities or differences. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.